Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Gary Marshall, you have known Gary for more years than I'm willing to admit. I first met him when he was at the University of Maryland working with Ben Schneiderman and Catherine Plaisant and folks there doing some of the early work in information retrieval and human-computer interaction. He's one of the people who's continued to bridge that gap. Ed is organized as a reading group here at Microsoft, so several of us have been reading papers by Gary and others looking at a variety of issues in human-computer interaction. And so today what he's going to do is tell us a bit about a vision of information retrieval as really sort of a core HCI issue. I should, before I get started, just mention that Gary does a lot of work on access to federal statistics, access to video collections. He's also the editor-in-chief of the ACM Journal on Information Systems, the chair of the Digital Libraries Conference, the recent PC chair of CIR. So he does all sorts of great community things in addition to his work in IR and HCR. So it's a pleasure to have Gary here.
Thanks, Sue. I'm almost as sleep as little as Sue. So. As she said, this is a little bit of a vision talk, although I think there are some demos. But I will apologize in advance because the demos that you'll see are nowhere near as cool as the Microsoft demos. So here's the outline. We'll start with a little bit of motivation and sort of the statement of the vision. I'll give you a couple of examples of just little tiny baby steps toward perhaps moving toward this notion of human-computer information retrieval. And then we'll have some reflections, implications. I got lots of extra slides, so ask questions at any time. We'll make this informal. So here's sort of the gist of the message. That we have these fields, information retrieval, human-computer interaction. They've both been around, IR probably a good 40 years and HCI a good 20 years. And they're related in my mind, but one of the relationships is that in computer science departments they tend to be outliers, both. But I'd suggest that both of them have become a little bit staid in some respects, and the World Wide Web came along and sort of really jolted both of them. So I like to say to my students that the World Wide Web set back interface design about 10 years because statelessness was a problem for us, right? And so now we're starting to catch up again, but it sort of expanded the marketplace, and so it's a good thing. That for probably a good 5 years, the IR community basically ignored the World Wide Web, and so now they can't do that anymore, and are welcoming and sort of very much a part of it. The intersection offers really new opportunities, it seems, because in the IR world, we sort of have reached a plateau. We've been trying to push up the recall precision curve over time, and we've done a little bit more, but clearly it's not going to get sort of pushed into the perfect recall, perfect precision kind of realm, and so somehow we need to do something a little bit different, and so it seems to me that the obvious thing to do is to get the people involved. We've got smart organisms out there, and why not try to get them more involved in this rather than trying to just offload all this and let the system do it, and sort of get out of this kind of stilted model of communication between the machine and the human as being a dialogue that goes back and forth. So I put in something, I can go to sleep until the system responds, and then I do something, and we take these turns. We need to have constant engagement. So that's sort of the basic idea. There's nothing magical here. You're nodding your heads. You sort of all get it, right? The real challenge here from a design point of view is to try and get people continuously engaged. I mean, they're not going to take the time to stop and go look something up in the thesaurus and here's the best word to use. We know that. And they're not going to sort of give us literal relevance feedback and sort of say, oh, I like this one, I hate this one, and then reformulate the query. And so somehow we need to, I mean, I don't want to say we want to trick them, but basically you want to engage people into being involved in this process so that the retrieval process, and I actually prefer the term information seeking to retrieval, but I'll go with retrieval. It is part of your sort of your larger sort of life process, and it's not your objective. It's embedded in this work that you're engaged with, and so you really want to have sort of the human information processor sort of in some sort of symbiosis kind of relationship with information resources in which they're both mutually dependent. So here's the traditional model of IR. Basically, you have some document space of all the possible documents that could ever exist in the world and all the possible queries that could ever be thought of or expressed, and the problem is matching them, right? And so you have some sort of sample. In both cases, the sample might be the World Wide Web. It could be big, it could be small. The sample here might be my query, or the queries I've expressed in my lifetime. And then, of course, there's some sort of representation. I'll call those representations surrogates that stand for the sample. And then the key is they sort of come up with some nice matching algorithm. There are lots of good ones, and there are lots of good representation schemas that people have developed over time. This is a powerful paradigm. It's driven this R&D actually for a long time, and it's based upon recall and precision as metrics. And this has actually made information retrieval be acceptable to the technical community because we can actually measure things and say, okay, yes, we see that we're getting some improvement here. Let's continue down this path. Okay? However, things change, and there are two things I want to talk about as changes. One is that the content itself is changing, and then the second thing is that people and the installed base of the user community are changing. So, it's not only text anymore. We've got all kinds of different media out there, and if you just sort of think about the streams of data coming from sensors, that alone is just, what a rich area to start to work on from a sort of how do you manage it, let alone retrieve stuff out of that. It's multimedia, multilingual, and so that's all kind of pretty well known. To me, one of the more interesting things is that it's dynamic, right? That you've got this temporal stuff. So if you want to run some really powerful algorithm on a really big corpus, and you can do it all up front, the indexing all up front, and then you don't have to redo it like on the fly, then you've got a chance to apply some real computational power. But if it's changing all the time because there are blogs and wikis and all these sensor streams and things that are just constantly being updated, then that means that you're now somewhat limited in what you can do on the back end to actually sort of build really powerful indexing. More problematically, there's a lot of conditional stuff. There are these computed kinds of links and recommendations that are happening that didn't exist a minute ago. Right? And in fact, they might not have existed. They exist because certain conditions, not one person or one corpus happened, but because a whole bunch of people bought a particular product because Oprah said, this is a good one. And that then led to a chain of events that have a significant impact on what you're indexing. So I think this is actually our biggest problem here, is that this dynamism in the content is causing lots of changes. There's also the problem of actually not just indexing the content, if you will, the nodes, but the relationships between the nodes. And this is another sort of fascinating sort of new problem for us. I mean, hyperlinks are the obvious example, and I think that the notion of sort of link analysis has given us new sources of evidence, but it's only the beginning, I suspect, for kinds of relationships that exist. I don't know what the answer is. It's a little bit of an aside, but we were talking about sort of images, and so one of the things I like to do when I'm traveling is, you see a couple and they're, trying to take each other's picture, and you say, well, may I take your picture? And you take their photo and you give them back their camera, hopefully, and then you go on your way and they go on your way, and you never see them again. But somehow there's a link there. That link is one that is never really captured, right, and exploitable. But in my mind, I sort of have these images of people I've met for like, 3 minutes maybe, or at the max, or around the world at various periods of my life, who I sort of have this link with. Now, how do we begin to sort of take advantage of things like that? We're not quite there yet to think about those kinds of linkages not only for the purposes of retrieval, but for kind of enriching our lives. So, I mean, I think we're just at a beginning point here for these kinds of content relationships and finding ways to mine and take advantage of them. And the stuff I've seen work and other demos going on or systems being developed here are, I think, really good examples of sort of first steps in that direction. All in all, it boils down to content is now acquiring history. And so can we begin to sort of take advantage of that history? And that sort of implies this context retrieval, which is a pretty big problem area in IR today. Our responses to the content trend, link analysis I mentioned, we try to take these multiple sources of evidence. We've always had the author's words as sort of the primary source of evidence. And in the olden days, we used to depend a lot on index or an abstract or words. More and more that's sort of put aside, and there may be a reawakening of that, I think, for very sort of high-end kind of data that people are willing to pay for, scientific data for example. The author's citations and links, that certainly Google and others have learned from ISI and the old work of citation networks, how to leverage that. Search paths in terms of recommenders and opinion miners, and there's a lot of work being done in sort of, well, can we use the machine-generated features? So we were talking earlier, Curtis and Steve and I, about the GPS and the camera kind of thing and what the possibilities and limitations of that are. So there's a couple of challenges here. One is, what are the new relationships? So I gave you this example of taking the photo of some stranger and never seeing them again is that one? Does it really matter that we all converged in this room at this point in time? Well, I don't know, maybe not. What are the things that are really important that we can take in this? Some seventh grader is going to come up with some really good idea about some relationship that we might be able to leverage. So that's sort of one problem. The other one that's more of a technical one is, how do we integrate the multiple sources? So the data fusion sort of issue. Is it just a linear combination of these things and they all just get weighted the same way? I don't think we know very much about that, frankly. So here's the other trend, and that's the user-based trend, that I think the web and television have basically taught us that clickers are okay, or remote controls are okay kinds of devices, and in fact have legitimized the concept of browsing as an information-seeking strategy. So when I was in junior high school and I was told, no, you don't want to just browse, you need to go look in the index of the encyclopedia. I didn't even know there was an index in the encyclopedia, and I'll bet a lot of undergrads today don't know that there are actually paper encyclopedias, number one, but then secondly, that there are these things called indexes. And so the idea of browsing or selection is kind of an accepted strategy to the formal analytical search kinds of strategies. So that's a big change. It seems to me that, as much as I'm a user-centered guy, I mean, people have to take some responsibility. To assume that you can just type in a word and then get the answer back is kind of naive, right? I mean, unless it's really a very, very specific, well-tuned, known item type search. But we've somehow raised people's expectations beyond the realm of reality, and so somehow this is kind of it's a media thing and it's an educational thing to try and help people to have a little bit more responsibility in the search process. Moreover, I think that people are beginning to want to get beyond the search results to, I want to understand this stuff. And so, a good librarian in a school will not only sort of give you that document or that book or that article or whatever, but they might actually help you try and contextualize it and maybe understand it, especially if it's in, say, in a K-12 environment. That's part of their job. And at the university environment, that starts to be a little less crucial, and then certainly in the public library, it's like, take it, go away, because I've got lots of other people, and it's really none of my business. And so this notion of getting to the understanding is an important extension. So summarization in the IR sense is sort of one attempt to address that. It seems that, I mean, ultimately what we want to have is this kind of relationship between people and these systems, so that it's not us against them. It's, you know, we're working together to try and, you know, I don't think it's an adversarial relationship with my car usually, you know, to get me from one place to another. It's just, you know, we work together to do this, and sometimes I even talk to it, and it doesn't bother me too much. Well, it depends on what I'm saying. So the responses to the people trend is, you know, we're going back to some of the sort of early work, and, you know, we know relevance feedback works. Is there, or helps, is there a way we can actually make it less painful or more automatic, or somehow get people engaged in doing relevance feedback right from the get-go? Query expansion I'm a little more skeptical about, although I think in the case of personal information management, then query expansion probably makes a lot of sense because it's still your stuff and things that are related to. Sue and I were talking a little bit about this earlier this morning. But to actually do that sort of on the entire web is perhaps a little more problematic. And, you know, everyone's going back to the old user modeling literature and trying to figure out if there was some magical answer to building in user models so that we could do a better job to tune results and tune systems to people's needs. You know, I think recommender systems are interesting in this regard. And are good responses to the people changes. Another good example is the My Life Bits kind of approach, in which by sort of studying all of our interactions, we may be able to sort of create genres or kinds of slices through our sort of life space that will allow us to organize things. Okay. I think we're going to have a lot of human tuning of IR systems. What I sort of tell my students is that that's going to be one of their jobs. So the cataloger of the future, perhaps, is not going to be actually cataloging or tagging books, but they're going to be like tuning algorithms, right? You know, changing the parameters on a clustering algorithm or on a classification algorithm. And of course, where sort of my work mainly lies is here's another possible solution, is to try and improve user interfaces. And so being strongly influenced with Schneiderman and folks at the HCIL, I believe in this dynamic queries idea. And one extension that sort of we've been working on for several years is this notion of agile views. It's a little bit problematic because I don't want to limit the views to only be visual things, so they're alternative representations. So yeah, to summarize this and try to pull it all together, instead of thinking of IR in that sort of original model of this matching algorithm between some document space and some query space, we really want to sort of put people in the middle here and think of it from the perspective of a human that's got needs and skills, and those skills are changing and evolving over time, and powerful information resources. And I would like to call those things digital libraries, but there are things that are other than digital libraries. The web is not a digital library. And they're connected to communities. And so the social networking sort of activities that are going on, I think, are something that we need to also fold in here. I'm a little skeptical about you know, Delicious solving all of my indexing needs, but you know, it's one piece of the puzzle that may be helpful if I'm not able to sort of do a good articulation of my need right now. And these things sort of evolve over time. So that's a big challenge, right? But it's one that I think will sort of sustain us if we step back and think about the sort of HCI problem that way. There's plenty of work to do. So. Actually, I want to sort of skip that and go on to sort of maybe a visual pattern. So here's, yeah, I'm sorry about the bad graphics, but I'm just not that good at it. So basically, the traditional model is that we have these kind of physical interfaces and conceptual interfaces that we pass through to get to a system, and what we really want to do is sort of get as close that person as close to the world as we can. And this stuff, becomes, I don't know if it should be transparent or not, but it certainly needs to be more integrated. And so this piece, this IR piece that was like the whole IR problem, needs to be embedded in this larger way of thinking. So that's sort of a graphical way to sort of say what I just said in those words on that last slide. So some of the challenges here is, excuse me, some of the challenges are to develop a metadata generation schema. And I think there's some good debate about how much metadata do we need. How much metadata do we need to generate automatically, and how much does the user actually have to provide? And I think this is kind of an age-old problem, but it's coming to a head within the search community right now. If you talk to people who sort of work in libraries, this is like sort of hitting right home at the sort of heart of things, right? Well, we don't need any metadata. Then what do we do? What are we good for? Are we just kind of like storage sort of shelves? And that's kind of a bit of a problem. There have been some really provocative papers written along these lines. There was an IEEE multimedia paper about a year or two ago about let's have a moratorium on metadata, and there's a paper coming out in JSIST soon that sort of gives some nice data about why metadata actually doesn't help much on the web for university websites and government websites, even for sites that add a lot of metadata. And so there's some real strong questions being asked about the expense and all of the metadata hype and ontology development, this and that. I sort of think that we need it. But I don't believe that we need to invest more time creating the metadata that took to create the original object to begin with. Okay? Unless it's Shakespeare or something. Right? So this whole metadata generation issue is a big problem. And the other one that I'm more interested in, frankly, is the alternative representations and control mechanism. This is that agile views. What we'd like to do is be able to give people alternatives so they can quickly look back and forth between the alternatives and say, oh, that's what I really want to, here's the way I want to slice and dice the world. Take my slicing and dicing of the world, and now I can sort of begin to work in that sort of environment. So that's sort of one challenge. Another is this, sort of this literacy issue. Try to get people engaged without insulting them. Try to keep people moving through this information-seeking process without turning them off or sort of wasting their time. And I think finding ways to add this human intelligence is part of the trick, and hopefully I'll show you some examples of where maybe that's beginning to happen. The other thing that we really do need are new evaluation measures, because recall and precision just isn't going to make it, right? So I have a few suggestions here, but this is really a very open problem. I'm going to switch to a little quick demo here. So this is an application we call a relation browser for about 10,000 or so films that are in the UNC library. And basically the films are laid out by genre, decade, format. We didn't do this. This isn't just in the database, for the library. And there's a web-based retrieval system for this. So this is kind of an alternative for that. The numbers represent the number of films in each of the genres and each of the decades. And so basically what you have is, in this case, 3 facets that have a number of categories assigned to them, and then the layout or the think of that as a histogram or a frequency distribution of the films for each of those different facets. And the way this works is, as I move the mouse over any of these categories, things get updated immediately, right? So this is the standard sort of dynamic query type interface. And so if I'm sort of interested in Westerns, and I come down here and just hover the mouse over, I've not clicked on anything yet. I've now basically done a query, right? And the query returns a result, 373 Westerns, and here's a distribution of Westerns by decade, and here's the formats we have in the library, and oh, gee, it's kind of interesting. Westerns aren't very popular anymore. And so I wouldn't call it a data mining sort of tool, but it begins to allow you to investigate relationships across facets in a much easier way than typing SQL queries or doing a whole set of fill in the forms on a web search. Okay, so. All right, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to just click. All right, so it actually just freezes Westerns, and now I can continue to browse. Okay, and I can continue to sort of. So let's say I did want them all. Then I do search, and we actually separated. In the previous version, it did return them. This goes out to just a MySQL database and grabs these. If I were on the web right now, these would all be live to the full bibliographic records for these things, and you can get this stuff on the web. I just wanted to play it safe here. So that's the way this works, right? So nothing sort of too astounding here. I know Schneiderman's been here, and so you've seen lots of these kinds of examples. And what I wanted to sort of do is sort of two slides, one on sort of the goals and then one on the challenges. First of all, the one goal is to try and facilitate this exploration, right? So that it basically is an exploratory tool, right? The second thing that it does is it allows you to slice and dice in different ways. So what you can actually have a whole pick list of facets, assuming you have the metadata, right? You can sort of slice and dice this a lot of ways. And there's string search within the partition I didn't show you, but you could type in words down below or characters down below, and it would narrow down, and they're tightly coupled to the browsing up above. Let's get to the limitations because you probably know a lot of the possibilities here. There's some real technical limitations. If there are 10,000 pieces, you can send. It's got to be on the client side is the main limitation, right? So somehow you need to get the metadata to the client side, and if you think about it, every one of those numbers, all the possible combinations of the numbers. So it's a combinatorial explosion problem, and so we've restricted the to ands going across facets and ors within a facet just to sort of parse that down a little bit. But frankly, if you get to 100,000 objects in the database, this thing slows down pretty dramatically. And when we did the CS department's logs and had about 2.5 million objects, it just went away la la land, and it is a scalability problem that we acknowledge there. There are some sort of possible ways to address that, but that's sort of a different sort of issue. But that's one kind of technical problem. The other problem actually is it doesn't apply to every sort of database problem, right? Because if you have authors' names, you just don't have enough screen real estate. So screen real estate is a real limiting factor here. So what you really want are things that, where you can have a small number of facets. You could probably have 50 facets, but then you'd have pick lists of what you want to lay out on the screen, 3 or 4 or 5 of those things. But it's the categories within any facet that really need to be probably 15 or so, because otherwise, they really need to fit on the screen. Okay, and so that becomes another kind of conceptual limitation. And but I guess the caveat there is that that still covers a lot of ground. Right? So this isn't a complete solution to any interface problem or any database problem, but it's a way to sort of handle quite a lot of them. Another limitation is user expectations. When we've done user testing, this was actually an earlier version of this was on the FedStat site for 9 months, actually in production, and people thought it was a search tool, which it kind of is, rather than an exploratory tool. And so we actually put it within the sitemap category. So if you went to sitemap and then it was an alternative sitemap that you could use, then people played around. But even then, they still sort of thought of it as, oh, well, I wanted to be able to just type in something and get results back. So it's trying to allow people to sort of understand what this is actually supposed to do. I mentioned the fact that there's limitations on how much metadata, but getting the metadata is actually the big problem. Right? So we've been working with federal statistical agencies. We say, well, could you give us sort of metadata for the Bureau of Labor Statistics 35,000 web pages? Well, no one really has that, or they're in different departments, and you just can't get it. So we did a little bit of work with trying to get it automatically, because the idea was to create an alternative representation for the website they already have. And so the basic idea here was, crawl the pages. We only did the HTML, so there are about, 13,000 pages, I think. Build some sort of representation, do the usual filtering and, things like that. Project into some lower dimensional space, and we tried lots of different things. Cluster the results, which yields some sort of probability of every page being in a certain bin, and then naming problem is a big one, right? How do you name those clusters that you get? And so we've used some sort of human effort there, which I think actually makes a lot of sense. That's a good place to actually add the human into this process. And then once that's done, you use your probability distribution to just throw the things in the bins, and then pipe it into the relation browser, which is just an underlying sort of database, and that gets you topic. Okay, so that one facet. Because that's all we were doing here. Time actually is very hard to do. We didn't know how to do time. We didn't know how to do geography. There are lots of ways to do it. We use some sort of just knowledge-based approaches with like a lot of geographic words, and threw things into state, local, region, international kinds of bins, and use that as another facet. But those are very hard problems to work with. Yes.
The input is the documents that you brought?
Yes. The HTML documents, yes. Right. And the outputs, the output's a bunch of numbers that then get used to go through those 13,000 web pages and say it belongs in this bin, and then that gets mapped onto, there's about a 9-table architecture for this relational database that sits under the relation browser, and mapping it onto that. It's actually pretty easy then, because that's only one facet. It's really just topic. There's a toolkit that is on SourceForge, it's take it for what it's worth, right? But what we would like is our statistical agency partners to begin using it. They paid for it, so they should use it, but other people could as well. So that's sort of one approach to this metadata. Now we did a small user study in which we took the clusters and we got several people at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We twisted their arms enough so that they actually went and made some judgments about the quality of the binning, and it was okay. It wasn't great. My takeaway message from this is that this doesn't solve the problem. All this does is it does give you an alternative, and it is scalable. Right, this is something that no way is BLS going to hire catalogers to go in and index those 35,000 pages that are actually on their web page. So that's just not going to happen. Let alone the more than 1 million pages that are on the Federal Statistical Agency websites, all 70 of them taken together, right? The Census Bureau and health statistics and all the rest, right? They're just not going to do that. So this is really our only hope to provide some alternative. Right. So they already have a decent organic structure that was created to put the web pages up in the first place. I'm not advocating getting rid of that. All I'm saying is that here's an alternative that we might want to give people to be able to explore. And I think the only solution here is really to do something automatic in conjunction with some human effort. Because it's one thing to say to an agency, look, if you can put some of your economist or statistician or whomever you employs time, let's say no more than 50 hours a year, into working with the technical folks who are doing all of this work to do the naming. If you'll go through some lists of words, frequently occurring terms, or log-zod ratios, and some pages, and say, do the training sets and things, then you're going to get some payoff here. I think that's a reasonable expectation. Asking them to hire 5 full-time people to go and index all their pages, never going to happen. Okay?
Yeah, just to be clear, this is a single facet that you're extracting based something something on topic.
This is only the topic facet. And because we thought topic was probably the most important one. And we've done some things with doing multiple topics by using the probabilities in the model, and they hated that. But maybe it was just a sort of a bad example. So the same figure you saw before, only now that little sort of box being stuck in here, right, where it's not that sort of quote old model of IR, but it's this sort of this more dynamic model of retrieval that gets put into this, again, embedded sort of human-computer information retrieval. So that, even though we might have some really good ideas about building a better system, the system itself still has to be embedded in this larger process. Now the next thing is to switch here. And I'm not claiming. I probably got to refresh here. That this is HCIR at all, right? These are like little baby steps toward this process. Things that might give people sort of a chance to get used to the notion that it's not just either all drill down selection versus type in a term in MS Search. Those aren't the only two options in the world. That there's a blend here. So in this video system, open video, there's sort of the standard search stuff, and then there's the kind of slicing and dicing done here based on some metadata kinds of things. And there's the usual featured stuff, and we don't really have a good recommender system sort of solution here. We had some good success with some prototypes, but it's not working in the actual system. So this is a real system. I mean, this is about 2,500 videos here. People do use it. About 20,000 unique people a month use this and grab video and stuff. So it's out there. It's kind of a production system, but it's our base for doing the kind of research we really want to do, which is on how do people make sense of video, how can they reuse video, and how can we build better interfaces, especially surrogates, visual and hopefully some audio surrogates that help them sort of get quick sort of vists or gists of the meaning. So if I put in, I've been doing some work with the New York Public Library dance division. Put in dance, and you get back some things, right? So your usual kind of result set, and so I would call this the last was an overview of the whole collection. This is now an overview of that partition of the database that somehow has something to do with dance. Really simple search. This is only MySQL search here, right? So this is about as basic as you can get. Somewhere in this record there was the word dance. So we're not doing anything more fancy than that. But you get some alternative ways to lay this out. So if I don't like this, the one I actually prefer when I'm working with this is this layout, right? So I get a little bit of a choice as to how I'd like to sort of review these things, and I sort of like the popularity thing that comes here, and this gives me a different view. And if you're like really extreme and you hate words, you can go to something that has no words and just sort of one poster frame for each one. All right, so, I'm sorry? Just number of downloads. So it's real simple number of downloads. So here are these sort of this first level view, and in classical video, they're long and they're bandwidth hungry and so on. So you really want to give people some better sense about what's going on before they click on sort of download that thing or launch your player. And so one thing would be to continue to push on the words, and lots of people are doing that. And so that's not really our thing. Our words are actually not so good, frankly, because they're done by students who sort of, get hired to sit there and watch this and make some words. I got slammed big time by a dance critic on that. Well, that's just sloppy. Sorry. But let's take a look at one of these that is actually a tough dance. This is a good one. So I'm now decided that within this partition, I'd like to preview. So I'm going from an overview of a collection or a partition to a preview of a specific object. And so here we have, the text, which is actually pretty helpful. And I have two surrogates here. Now, our goal is to have at least 3 and eventually 5 or 6 different kinds of sort of non-text surrogates. A storyboard is the usual sort of set of extracted keyframes. We use software from University of Maryland called Merit that automatically extracts scene change frames from uncompressed MPEG video. And then from those, we actually manually select up to 36, a maximum of 36 frames that we think are representative. So that's a bottleneck in our processing, our workflow right there.
Representative based on
whatever that student who's doing it thinks that is representative at the time. And in fact, if you go to the Internet Archive, and I've talked to them quite a lot about this, it's probably just as good to do every nth. I don't think we're doing any better, frankly. And that actually speeds up the processing enormously. The most interesting one, though, is the fast forward. It's such a simple notion that you want to give people fast forwards, but it sort of totally blows people away. And we've all seen fast forwards, but we actually have our NSF-funded work was to actually look at user studies of these different surrogates, and so we've done pretty extensive usability testing for different parameter settings for the surrogates, and fast forwards were of particular interest. Oops.
So,
yep.
What happened? I just am fooling around with the system and I see something with no fast forward in it.
Yeah, that's because most of this, we won't put anything up unless there's at least a storyboard, and so we've put a lot of video up that has just a storyboard. Making the fast forwards is a separate process for us, and so that's a different student who sort of is going to sit down and it's an automatic process, but it still has to be done manually. And so right now, the project ended 2 years ago. We were on a no-cost extension last year, and so right now I'm just getting geared up to hire some new students and come in. We've got all the Chi and SIGGRAPH and all that stuff digitized, sitting in boxes, but it's not up here. I mean, some of it is, but most of it is not, just because I won't put it up until we at least have a storyboard. So I think we'll get that stuff up in the next several months once I get some students in. But that's why there's a lot of things that don't. I was careful to choose something I knew had a fast forward. Okay, the fast forwards are 64x, so they're every 64th frame. And
What's manual about that? If you're just taking every 64th frame?
Starting it up.
I see.
Yeah, it's not rocket science, but I need a student I can teach how to do, or some other graduate student could teach him or her how to do that. Sit them down in front of the machine, say, here's your hours, come in and do this, and put them in these directories. And that? Yeah, right. Yeah. No, yeah. All right. So this is sort of the idea here, and if I now kind of, well, I know we're running sort of low on time here, so I'm going to kind of maybe quickly do a little. Well, do you want to see some other kinds of fast forwards that are not 64x? I mean, this is always kind of fun. So let's do this. This is a 9-minute video. You're going to watch a 9-minute video now at 32x, and yeah, sure. Oh, I thought I had all that cached. Now, I'm sorry it's small. Getting anything of that? Yeah.
So with sort of investigatory interface, I'm curious to know. It looks like you're relying, when we go back to the video on the video site, it looks like you're relying almost exclusively on text. And I'm curious, are you doing any kind of contrast analysis to do? So, I mean, I did a video a while back ago, and so, with every kind of data, you have to apply different methods to extract contextual relevance. So, in this method, doing contrast analysis to even identify similar shapes or forms across multiple, in other words, trust the metadata? Maybe not. Is the metadata always reliable?
No, and in fact, that's why you actually want to show the sort of raw material. I'm counting big time on folks at CMU and MIT and Stanford and other places, Microsoft, to do the feature extraction and automatic identification. We've looked at the color histogram stuff and the optical flow and all of the methods that people have developed over time to try and actually sort of do content-based retrieval. What I want to do is just apply it. Give me something that works, and I'll leverage it and apply it here, because what I'm interested in is which of these kinds of surrogates are people going to be able to make sense of and use, right? So I see this as being a suite of things. We don't have any good audio surrogates, and that's something I'd really like to begin to work on, right? We could begin to look at speaker alternation patterns, we could look at gender patterns, we could look at things that are pretty simple. And I think that will add value as well. So my vision is that, a few years down the road, given the right sort of student mix, there would be 5 or 6 or 8 different kinds of surrogates that people could use to kind of get a sense of that video, probably one at a time. The CMU skims, I think, were probably the best attempt to try and integrate all this together, but it took time. Right? They were pretty temporally bound. Yeah, sure.
First, are you taking advantage of people's time in the system? In other words, if I'm doing open-ended queries, I'm dwelling on a particular piece of media, can you extract some relevance out of that and say, oh, okay, this is I can do some associations with terms that may not be related at all to your database.
I'd love to do that. And then a guy named Johan Bolin was working with us to try to do some of that. He basically was just mining our logs. And he used a neural network approach to try and make recommendations. And he found some nice things. The one I remember best was there's a video in here called it's about dating, teen dating, and it doesn't have the word how much affection. How much affection is the name of it? It's an old 50s thing, and he actually had that returned when you put in things like love or dating or things, even though it wasn't in the metadata.
So my other question is, which is also related to this sort of categorization, is so in the previous screen that was kind of analogous to the Schneider report with the massive filtration that you're doing. One of my concerns is when I see these kinds of interfaces, and don't take this the wrong way, I'm a designer, so I'm coming at this as a designer, the first thing I want to know is what is the user trying to do? And I suspect that you ran into some of that when people started to play with it, because they came to it and say, I'm looking for something.
Right.
So when I see these either machine-generated topics or topics that are very, very domain-specific, what immediately occurs to me is, gosh, if I really don't know a good definition for what film noir is, how do I know what film noir is? And most people, most people have an understanding of these basic terms, but they don't. A lot of times we'll see people describe them using something like, Night of the Hunter or, The Big Sleep, whatever. So how do you anticipate accommodating these sort of open-ended, don't understand the domain space, don't want to understand how your database is organized, frankly?
Yeah. That's a great question, because and it's something we've been struggling with. I'm thinking about the relation browser, for example. Does it go before your MSN search or after? Right. So if you could use it to sort of slice and dice the space. Like I'm going to do a search, but I know I don't really want to search the whole web. So I'm going to do a quick kind of a set of mouse overs, get a partition, now do my search, right? Whatever term I type in, and now I've, in a sense, filtered the web. So that's one way to think about it. I don't know technically how to do that, right? I mean, so, yeah. Okay. The other one is that you get the result set back, and now you partition it using a tool like that. Yeah. So I mean, and which one of those is, you know, technically feasible? I think of this as an interface server kind of thing, where, you know, basically you could use this for Amazon, you could use it for, you know, Land's End, you could use it for lots of different things, because they'll publish their database, right, their schema, and so you basically are able to maybe let people pass through this kind of interface as a front end to these other kinds of services. So yeah, I'd love to talk more about that. Okay, well, let's, that was, what was that? Did anyone recognize anything? That was at 32x? Right? Yeah, you got some things out of that probably. People almost always get things out of that. I'm going to actually skip ahead, and we're going to go right to the 256x. So this, don't close your eyes. So this is 14 minutes of video. Well, it's not that bad.
The Lucy show? Well, McCarthy hearing.
So it's very seldom do we get much out of that. Anyone see like the Lions Club symbol, or that one? People, yeah, cars, you know. So that one's really tough. Actually, I should have. Let me show you the 128. It's pretty fast, and I guess I must have.
It's amazing how much of a difference color makes.
Yeah, color makes a big difference. I think genre, in our data, we definitely saw that genre matters, topic, or the genre of the video matters a great deal. Do you recognize anything in there? Middle East, right, stuff. And people will point out there's a monotonic decreasing function that's on all the metrics we used: object recognition, concept recognition, prediction of whether something else belonged in the video, and we had about 6 different metrics we used. And from 32 to 256, it just decreased. And 64 was sort of where the biggest drop came. So in our design decision, we made 64 the default in the actual open video.
Yeah. And could you compare? Could you pull up the previous one?
So you want to see the 128 and the 256.
Yeah.
So which one do you want to see first?
Either one.
Okay, so here's 256.
So Lions Club this time.
Yeah.
Or is it?
Because you pulled it out.
And you want to see this one now?
So you know what the difference is? One of the big differences here is that you go back and forth between color. Well, it's contrast, and it's also the amount of information in each screen is drastically different. This pulses between a lot of information and a little bit of information, static, near static, or defined with broad areas of space around it, easier to recognize. That one has got a lot of very congested space.
Right.
No negative space.
And this is actually a narrative, and this is a documentary. So the genre really does matter.
Do some keyframe extraction, so some important frame maybe sustain a little bit longer to help.
So that's actually something that we've talked about. We're not doing that now, but that certainly makes a lot of sense, right? That for when there's not a lot of change, you know, then you do it a sampling at a different rate. Sure, yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah.
So what do you find people are using these to do? What is it that they
They get a different sense than the words. They're getting something else. They're getting a more visceral kind of what I would call vist instead of gist. Instead of this sort of thing in which it's an aboutness that relates to these concepts. I get a sense of this. I get an aesthetic sense. Certainly the color versus black and white is one extreme example. But is this something that's action-packed? Is it narrative? Is it are there a lot of people in it? Is it more like scenes? Things that wouldn't necessarily be captured in the words that somebody would write in a sentence.
Selection process as opposed to refinement process.
I think so. Yeah, that was the original intention, right? That this would be a way to sort of make better decisions about whether you want to actually go download this thing.
How many frames are in each one of these?
Well, they vary by how long they are. Like so that 128X was 14 minutes, and
I'm curious. Have you tried just doing? Well, obviously you did the storyboard thumbnails.
Yeah.
The difference between the two and people getting the gist of what was going on.
Yeah, there are some differences, but mainly there are preferences, and there's actually some trade-offs. There's an interesting trade-off between sort of speed and fatigue and satisfaction. So what we find is that people can actually do really well at these extremely high rates. And when we've done work with like slideshows as well, but they don't like them. And they like the storyboard because they can control it, even though it takes them a lot longer to scan it, and they can go back and forth and things. So we have almost an inverse relationship between performance and satisfaction.
What if you just showed the first few seconds of the...
That's our third surrogate, the actual excerpt. We take the first 7 seconds. And we sort of go by the credits usually and start at the end of the credits and then show 7 seconds. And the good thing about that is it gets you a little sound. But sound is something we want to actually move toward. And so assuming I can assemble the right group, and now we've got some new NSF money, then we'll start to sort of do the second iteration of this in the next year or two.
70% of experience. Yeah. I'm sorry, one more quick question. Your user base, are those strictly undergrads across the board, or are they film students?
I have no idea.
Right, so
When the server goes down, we get email. That's how I know it.
Here's an observation. So I've done film research like this before, and in fact, the most effective way to go through this is actually to go at just enormously high speed so that you can actually get a quick understanding of what's going on. My guess would be that if you're using rank and file undergrad students who are not used to looking at media that way, in the same way that a photographer looks at negatives and understands what the picture's about, that you're going to get a preference that's much more static. When you're talking to people who are in a specific domain or field where they're doing film research and are used to looking at this, they're probably going to prefer this.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. The users I don't know who they are, but when we do our studies, we've done half a dozen different studies. Some are the undergrads. We try to get people who are either in film studies or journalism, and then in a couple of studies we actually got people who are film producers and people who work in TV studios and as editors. And there was actually some qualitative work done with what they look at and how they make relevance judgments in video. There's a whole dissertation on that. Yeah.
Baseline work to evaluate what their analog systems were like versus...
A little bit, yeah. In terms of what they were used to using, yeah. So I remember one guy who was the video editor. Yeah, I mean, forwards is like, yeah, we do this all the time, right? Now, not at that rate, but. Yeah.
Just I just wonder whether there's any statistical study to see what would be the limit at which they will become totally noise.
Yeah.
Basically, it's all gone.
Yeah, 5 is really high. I mean, even 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how we started, actually. We looked at the literature, and the smallest number I ever found was Mary Potter's work that showed that you could actually, the eye system would recognize something in 30 milliseconds. Now, I don't think anything is going on in 30 milliseconds here because that's just one thing flashed on the screen. Did you see it? Right? The usual numbers are between 50 and 100 milliseconds to actually recognize something. When you now take that and then you immediately put something else right after it, whether there's enough time to say to actually the perceptual system may do the recognition, but whether it gets into the cognitive side or not in 50 milliseconds is unknown to me. I suspect that 100 milliseconds is probably okay. And we've got lots of data that people actually remember things and so on. Now, they don't remember all the things, though, so we don't know what else is going on, but somehow the selectivity is there at around 100 milliseconds and probably below. So, yeah, there is some work there.
Even with the 50 milliseconds, you do get priming effects. So there's evidence that it's getting in somewhere, but you don't get the robust recall and things like that.
There's a huge literature on sort of visual masking and visual detection.
Okay, so we're over time, and let me just sort of move to, I guess, one of the last slides here. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Here's sort of the closing thing that, the way to think about sort of retrieval is really as a core life process. It's something we're always doing. It's and this idea of oh, I need to stop now and go look something up is no longer necessary. I mean, people want to Google in their car. Sorry, they want to do that activity all the time. Yesterday, the cab driver was saying, "Yeah, all I do is when I hear a song, I don't even try to remember it anymore. If I'm with somebody, we'll just type the few words into Google, and we'll get it." And so this idea of an external memory, a digital library that we sort of carry with us at all times, that's easily accessible and manipulable, is I think where we're going. Lots of sort of social issues, political issues probably associated there, but there are just a lot of technical issues. How do you control that? What are the agile mechanisms that you can use to make that natural and to make that sort of part of your life is, I think, what we're working on. And these little examples, as imperfect as they are sort of beginnings. And I've already seen several demos, and I'm sure I'll see others today that sort of also push this forward to this time in which we won't have to sort of pull out our laptop. Cell phones getting there, right? So where we're a little bit closer to sort of incorporating these new media and extensions of our memories into our ordinary conversations. So with that, I will close and be happy to take other questions or talk individually.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, there is a dilemma here. I want to see your demo. I mean, for a limited domain, like video search, people can do all this histogram stuff. But for generic, the user, I don't really want, first of all, I have to get to your site, right?
Yeah, right.
And that requires some additional process to get into those. So how do you balance these two? One is that I'm just, doing what I want.
Right.
Versus getting into something that I know I want and then do some detail browsing, search.
Well, think of how far we've already come. It used to be that I would have to, if it wasn't in my personal library, then I would have to sort of find another library to go to sort of look something up or get information, walk down the hall to a colleague and ask them the question, call them on the phone. And now, with email and instant messaging and search engines, I'm now able to actually just stay in my office and sort of be connected to the world in a probably more facile way. Now, whether that's good or not is a different question. And I think we're just beginning to sort of get toward making that even richer. A lot of you have cameras in your offices and been in sort of I don't know what you call it here, see you, see me, or that's probably not what you call it anymore, but kinds of environments where it's not just on the phone and my voice, but there's additional modalities involved. And I don't quite buy into sort of the ubiquitous, intelligent agent that's always with me and can answer all my questions. The Knowledge Navigator sort of video is always fun to watch. We still aren't there. Why is that?
In the suppose I want to search video and I type in the Google, it may or may not actually put your site to the top. Maybe your site probably is the best.
It will not. I can guarantee you, because all Google's got for video now is stuff that people have given them. So they crawl our site every day, and so we're indexing there, but they're not in Google Video. So we're talking to them about that. It's like, hey, why? Yeah, so you know, you're right, but I don't think this is so different than anything else we do in the world. I mean, if I need hardware, I don't go to the grocery store.
And another thing that struck me while listening to your earlier comment is that, I mean, the user, you comment that people don't really, you type a few words, you normally don't get what you want. But if you're thinking about talking with somebody, if I ask you what you want, you probably can use about 20 seconds to tell me what I want.
Right.
So that, how does that information get into, to the system to overcome some of the search that they want to do?
I could be flippant and say give bigger search boxes to sort of encourage people to type more, but that actually doesn't work so well. S. Jeeves did that. Yeah, he tried it. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it might be that voice would help a little bit, but it doesn't solve it. I mean, I really think getting people engaged, and so the thing you showed me today, where you typed in the first word, and then I said, why did it jump to the next? I think is actually onto something. Yeah, the flat thing, because there, it's not like I'm typing in my 2 words and then just expecting to hit enter. I typed in the first word, and as soon as the space bar, it sort of jumped down. There was also this cue to, oh, maybe it's wanting more. And I think, it's a matter of engaging people. And the other thing is that right now we're sort of trained to type something in and then stop thinking. And I mean, that's why I like this idea of the dynamics.
What's so different from people and people?
But it shouldn't. I mean, I think that's the point, is it's engaging in a dialogue. Whenever you ask me a question, I'm free to respond to you. Well, wait, do you mean blah? Do you mean this?
But I don't want to dialogue with my computer. I mean, so here's the thing, is 2 points. One is Fred Meyer. I don't know if you have a Fred Meyer or something like that. I can go in, I can get my groceries, I can get some hardware, not a lot of hardware, but some hardware. I can get some furnishings, that sort of thing. There's a reason that that's popular, because I want to go in and be able to get it all. And there's a reason that Google works and MSN Search works on their various levels.
Well, they don't give it to you all. They actually separate their domains very explicitly in tabs. There's image search, there's video search, there's web search, there's Scholar.
But they don't give you all the images in image search, and they don't give you all this. So I mean, I think what I'm getting to is, first of all, I think we can do a pretty good job with single word query with some context from the user, or even possibly no context from the user.
Get them in the neighborhood.
For the 80%, for the high-level stuff. The thing that really bothers me is when you get down, so at a certain point, as your expertise, and what I see a lot, what I'm seeing in a lot of your deck is expert systems for expert users, in a way. So a system needs to know a lot about data for users that have a basic understanding of what that data is about. And
that's certainly not the intention.
When I first see that when I first see the sort of the category filtration list, it's like, wow. Again, I have to know what film noir means before I can make it, before it becomes meaningful to me. Unless I start investigating through, and I'm willing to take that. What if I'm But
I don't think you actually do. What you need to know is what genre means, or topic, right? And now you see Western, you see romance, you see I don't know what film noir means. What is that? What is fantasy? I don't know. But it's there, and it's a different kind of thing than, say, Westerns. And at that point, now we start to. That's why I call it an exploratory tool rather than a search tool, right? It really is a way to do some learning as well as just search. And that's why my problem right now is that people think it's a search tool, and I think of it as it's either a pre-search tool or it's a post-search tool. How it gets sort of blended and merged into that, that main search sort of tool is what I'm not sure about. Technically, I'd really love to be able to do it at the front end. I just can't imagine how you could be doing all this indexing.
So here's the other. Here's my other observation. Say devices work which way for it. So I believe that when a person types in a single word query, which we know that's the norm. Right. So a lot of people type in single word queries. A lot of people type in 2-word queries, but and follow-on searches, often new queries. We've early search at MSN, we saw that people just weren't even interested in doing refinement. And this is 95. So I guess what I'm getting at is, first of all, when I'm typing in a query, I have something very specific in mind, and I'm not giving you all the information. I'm also using I'm using myself as a human filter to do evaluation as I go down the list of things.
Right.
Is it this, is it this? The second I hit another genre, the problem is now I have a contextual switch. Was I looking for news on this, or was I looking for, oh, no, not looking for news on this, going down. So I think that the trick is getting enough user context to provide good queries and providing enough follow-on information to do good disambiguation. The rub is, of course, knowing what the user is looking for and what kind of a user they are. And so you've got your Fred Meyers, and then you've got your film databases. And if you're a film researcher, you have no problem going through that stuff because you're already familiar with these genres. In fact, you're familiar with a whole bunch of subgenres. So, and that's why I'm talking about expert users in that scenario. The weirdness is where I have Fred Meyer, and I don't know if you're looking for Western cooking or Western films. So, finding a way to get past that is the disambiguation part of it.
That's the faceted classification sort of approach to search right now, right? And I think that's what we're trying to do here. You still have to have something to start with. I think starting with a 1 or 2 word query is fine. The difficulty is that I think, in some sense, the search engines have trained us to sort of put in 1 to 2 word queries, and because they're all tuned to do like precision at the top of the fold, right? Top 5 hits. And in fact, I don't know what Microsoft Search does, but I know what Google does, and they won't give me the 1 millionth hit. I want to see the bottom, right? Please show me the bottom 5, right? We can't even get that data, let alone begin to sort of think about what it means, because everything is so tuned to the sort of lowest common denominator of basically known item searches for well-known things, and that's why I think things like Google Scholar and more sort of portal type approaches are going to become useful. I mean, a lawyer has got to go to LexisNexis because they can't afford to miss too much stuff, right? So they don't want to just see that high precision kind of search, and so it's a natural process. We give the market what the market wants in terms of the biggest numbers, and that's actually what's driven things at this point in time, and that's where we are. And now I think what we're starting to do is starting to find these differential kinds of services that they're not going to be as big as sort of the the global place, but it's the specialized news, if you want to think of that, or it's the specialized literatures or things that are where I think a lot of this action is going to be.
How do you anticipate getting so you talked about community and human-to-human networking. How are you thinking about building that into these infrastructures?
Yeah, that's a good question. The recommender systems are the obvious ones, right? So the notion of collaborative filtering, right? So that's sort of we've played around with that to some degree. I suppose that if people are willing to sort of in their Facebooks and Friendster kinds of environments put up all that information and spend the time building those sort of personal profiles, that would be one way to begin to see it. So let's say that I'm an undergrad and I've got a Facebook entry that I've been using for a couple of years. Am I willing to sell that to Microsoft Search to be my profile, so that every time I now come to MSN, MSN, Microsoft Search, it actually, that profile's there. Now, notice I said that person would be willing to sell it to rather than it just be made available.
I'm asking a different kind of question.
Maybe we should take some of these offline, but I think we're still recording this and broadcasting it. So
one more.
if people are wanting to stay, that's fine.
Talking about the dialogue,
Yeah.
And Google give you one single that if you mistype words, it means I think it's very useful. So to what extent can this be extended even more? Like if I type Jaguar, I mean they will just ask the animal or the car.
Right.
So any study done on that just to see how deep a dialogue that people are willing to accept in order to carry out the kind of clarification of the meaning that people want to convey.
I don't know if those studies have been done, because the companies tend not to publish a lot of their results, at least as many as the studies they do. But it certainly seems like we have some pretty good evidence from pre-web kinds of searching that people are willing to do a little bit of that, but they're not willing to give much relevance feedback or much follow-up feedback. If it's a person, it's a lot harder to just say, no, just give me the answer. But if it's a machine, maybe you can just sort of cut it off. Come on, just give me. In fact, what we see is people switching engines, right? Well, A didn't do it. I'm going to go to B and give the same query and expect you get better results. It's kind of silly.
You saw that in Google, like in the show. You go to Frugal. You see disambiguation based on like price or location or things. So
Okay, but the West is never offered.
there's some work on location. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.